Hello, and welcome to the Neurospicy Travel Podcast. Join me on my adventures abroad, where I embrace solo travel head-on. As a person with autism, I'd love to share my personal stories, insights, and practical tips for other fellow travellers on the spectrum. In this episode, I'll talk about my fabulous solo trip to Lisbon in Portugal. I went for 4 days in February 2023, while the weather was warm enough to just wear a jacket and wasn't too overcrowded with tourists. I used Booking.com to find a nice hotel called Boa Nova Guest House, which offered free cancellation and had wonderful reviews. It was £150 for 3 nights, so it was only £50 a night, and was in a great spot too. I found my flights on Skyscanner, so I could find a good deal at a time that suited me. And the airline I chose was TAP Air Portugal, which had huge grey leather seats. I managed the airports with no issues, although I wish I'd had my sunflower lanyard with me to get through the crowds faster. I sorted my liquids and electrics before the gate so that I could go through as quickly as possible. I just took a backpack for this trip to save on costs and carrying everything around too. It seemed fine for a short 4-day trip. The flight was pretty short, but exciting being on a new plane. I remember a woman beside me getting confused with the seatbelts, and she took mine. It must have been about 5 minutes before I got the courage to ask her to swap them. I decided to sort the transfers myself to save some money and researched how to use their public transport on YouTube. I looked like a pro once I got there, knowing which ticket to get for which service. To be honest, it was much simpler than back home. The ticket machines had English written options and pass options based on how many days you needed it. The train stations were pretty quiet considering I was near an airport, so I was pretty calm the entire way to the hotel. I used Google Maps to find the right train and stops, and I was grateful that it was a direct trip with a short hilly walk at the end. The hotel was lovely. I didn't see another guest the entire time I was there, and I had so much space to myself throughout the building. I even had my own balcony. It was decorated like a church, with crosses and mats dotted around. A small Spanish lady ran the place, and we really struggled to understand each other, so I used my trusted Google Translate app to write what I wanted to say, and it would translate to Spanish for her to understand. She was accompanied by the cutest little dog called Flash. He wore a little knitted grey jumper. I thought it was funny that I remembered the dog's name but not the lady I met, but I guess that's how my mind's always worked. Although this lady spoke Spanish, Portuguese is actually the main language spoken in Portugal. It's a more complex one to learn, but thankfully the locals usually spoke English too. I paid about £6 in city tax at £2 a night. This is something tourists have to pay, mostly in Europe, to help with local infrastructure and improve the country's tourism. It's usually decided on by the location and the price of the room. I settled into my room well and planned to go for my first meal out just up the street from the hotel, as it had great ratings online and had traditional Portuguese food that I was eager to try. It was called cuchada and had beautiful Portuguese tiles around the door in blue and white with dark brown furniture inside. The staff were the happiest and most cheerful people I'd ever seen, welcoming everybody like they'd known them already for years. They were passionate about what they did and encouraged me to try green wine. It wasn't to my taste. I was only slightly disappointed that it wasn't actually green, but I can say I tried it now. The food was definitely like nothing I'd seen before. I asked for the bacalhau à brás, which was a combination of cod, fried potatoes, eggs and olives. The pile was huge, and I must have spent a good hour trying to get it down to not seem rude. Overall, it was an authentic experience and worth visiting to see the staff. The bill was reasonable, I would say, and I paid using cash. They take euros in Portugal. I made sure I had a good mix of cash and card and allowed £100 a day for food and spending money, which was more than enough. I booked a pub crawl on the first day to get to know people from other places. I booked it using TripAdvisor. Lisbon is known for its nightlife, so I gave it a shot and booked on a £20 tour around the town centre with a few drinks included. It started at 10 p.m, so I had a walk around the area first and found chickens free roaming the parks, which was great. I headed for the centre and sat at a bench, taking in the lively street of shoppers, drinkers with bottles of wine in their hands, boom boxes and street dancers. I started to get more anxious the longer I waited, as it quickly became rowdy and I couldn't see any organisers around. Just as I was about to turn around, back to the hotel, regretting my decision, A man popped up around the corner with an orange umbrella, looking for stragglers like me, too scared to jump in. I met a man who was quite old and couldn't quite figure out why he was there, as he spent the introduction showing his boat and money off to people. I was eventually rescued by a woman from Texas who was quiet and friendly. We went to the first bar, which was completely empty, with music blaring out and old TV screens on the wall with music channels on. We each got a free sticky shot of something I couldn't put my finger on, and spent the first stop trying to play a drinking game that nobody understood. Off to the second bar, and we were guided into a club packed with hundreds of people trying to get a drink. It was hopeless. Myself and the girl I'd met were fed up in the end, following so much noise, so we got an Uber back to our hotels, where drunk people covered every angle of the car as we pulled away. I knew the nightlife would be impressive, but I'd never seen anything like this before. It would have been easy to feel guilty for leaving so early and not making more effort, but I listened to what I needed, and at the time, I appreciated seeing what this place was like once it got dark. Day 2. I was getting used to seeing European cities having a limited breakfast menu, or at least somewhere that opened before 10 a.m, so I did some research and found a small cafe to walk to for a nice coffee and cheese croissant, which were lovely. The cafe was filled with hanging plants and blankets, which made it feel really homely. Today I'd planned to go to Lisbon Zoo. It looked like it had so many different and interesting animals, so I put it first on my list. I was mostly excited for the reptile exhibit. I got there using the tram, which stopped right outside. It was a little busy, but I managed okay crossing the complicated roads and getting in. It was a really hot day, and I remember everything just glowing like it was a tropical climate. The habitats looked like it too, with huge spaces filled with sand and tree trunk barriers. I saw hippos and gorillas, and things I'd never seen before. I definitely got my daily steps in. I headed back to the hotel for some rest, as I'd planned to go to Commerce Square and Belém too. Commerce Square is a lovely, vibrant yellow town square filled with markets and restaurants. I struggled to get there after getting on the wrong bus, but I got off and back on the right one with enough time. I managed to keep calm, which wasn't too difficult, as I was in a built-up area and wouldn't have been stranded anywhere. At the edge of the square, there were giant sand sculptures of cows laid down and rocks balanced 2 feet in the air. I really enjoyed this spot. It was really communal and had a fabulous view of the Red Lisbon Bridge. I wandered around the area, looking at the little stalls selling knickknacks, and got a drink before heading to Belém. This was further out, but still easy to get to by bus. It was more historical, with cathedrals and the Monument of Discoveries, which was built to represent the spot where ships sailed to the Tagus River to trade with India. An old man on a little chair sat painting next to it, selling his small canvases. I had to buy one. They were done in watercolour and worth every penny. I passed gardens and ports and Belém Tower, where a violinist played music from The Lion King. It was all beautiful, but as my luck would have it, my eyes started to run and the music was too loud for me to manage, so off I went again to get the world-famous custard tart, the pastel de nata. I went to the express checkout at Pastéis de Belém and spent €2 on 2 of the best custard-filled tarts I'd ever had. They were perfectly warm and crispy on the bottom. I sat and ate them at the closest bench I could find. It was just what I needed after all the walking I'd done. This had been a long day, so I headed back to the hotel for a small glass of wine and prepared myself for the next big day ahead. Day 3. On day 3, I'd planned a small group tour on TripAdvisor to show me around Sintra and Pena Palace. I paid £63.81 for this full-day tour. The photos online were amazing and vibrant, so I looked forward to this one. I was nervous about being with strangers all day, but was grateful that there were only 8 people. I turned up to the meeting spot super early to make sure I didn't miss the 8:30 a.m. pickup and was introduced to a small Asian family, a couple from America and 2 sisters. The tour guide was a very smiley woman who was great at keeping us all involved. It took a while to get to Sintra, driving through mountains and fishing villages, so we made a couple of stops to take a look at the beaches. Everyone was so friendly, getting to know each other and offering to take photos of me on my own. Once we eventually got there, the tour guide noticed that I'd probably be too cold walking to the top of the palace in my raincoat, so she gave me her scarf for the day. It was the sweetest thing. We walked through a wooded area uphill, and I remember seeing signs for lizards, but I didn't see any on the trip to the top. We were greeted by a huge building, bright yellow and red, with patterns and strange sculptures built around it. There was a route to follow to walk through it all. It was amazing to see the rooms back how they would have been when they were used. The people on the tour took photos of me stood in the castle turrets, looking out at the vast forest that surrounded it. I loved the details in the building too. Everything was significant and symbolic, and I remember seeing a stained glass window in one of the prayer rooms that had a king in a shield, and the king himself held a shield that had himself in it, even smaller too. After descending and almost making a small run down the steep exit, we headed to another fishing village for lunch. The American couple found that I was alone and invited me to join them for tapas taster-style Portuguese food. It was fabulous. The table was filled with breads and meats, cheese and fancy wine. They told me all about the politics in their country and how the weather was probably the same as England. In the end, they must have paid nearly all of the bill, as much as I pushed to pay for what I'd eaten, so I offered to pay for some coffees on the way home, which we did. It was lovely feeling so included in a group and learn about them too. I was very lucky that everyone was so friendly. The entire day had passed and I was exhausted. I headed back to the hotel, grabbing snacks from the corner shop on the way back, and found myself in a heap of noise. It turned out that there were protests going on to support teachers reaching miles of roads throughout Portugal. I wish I'd brought my earplugs, as I knew I had to cut through it to get back. It was the most stressful part of the trip, and got through by closing my eyes and charging through the middle of thousands of loud and angry people. I'm proud I did it looking back. Day 4. This was my final day in Lisbon, and had a really early flight back. The public transport was pretty limited, so I thought I'd book an Uber to the airport and make sure I was on time. This was £15.84, which wasn't too bad, and a huge van came to collect me. He put me in the back of his pitch-black bus and didn't say a word until the end of the trip. It was really strange, but was nice, as I'd only woken up a few minutes. This trip to date was absolutely my favourite, through the lively and colourful streets to the most friendly and inclusive people I'd met. For price and being autism-friendly, I would absolutely recommend a visit here. A quick disclaimer with ASD is how I feel and what I see. I have no facts, no wish to teach. I want to share confidence to head for the beach. Ask your questions and give advice. Write your comments, but keep it nice. Another tale of travel at sea. In 1 month's time, who knows where I'll be. A quiet space, sun, a sea that's glistening. Thanks for finding me, and thanks for listening.